Today, guys, on the podcast, I'm going to be talking about 5 books that influenced me greatly. So if you want to hear the list, hang around and listen to a novel review. Hello and welcome to the Literature Podcast, a novel review. My name is Seamus, your host, and together we will discuss, dissect, and explore the wonderful world of literature. And the wonderful world of literature is a vast and dense jungle. So let's start making our way through, one book at a time. Hey everyone, how are we going? Welcome back to another episode of a novel review, a book podcast. My name is Seamus, I'm the host, and yeah, basically I do a podcast, an episode a week, and I speak about normally one book a week, but this week I'm actually talking about 5 books in particular, 5 influential books that have, been a great influence to me over my life, so that should be really fun to get to. But I guess first, how are we doing? Is everyone well? I hope you're all well. If you're listening to this and you want me to do a book, please send me a recommendation. I do listen to them because I've got a great big pile of books here that have been recommended to me, which is my Mantelpiece Moments this week. So basically every week I do a Mantelpiece Moment, which is just an opportunity to reflect on the week past and think about something that I'd like to pull out and I guess put on the mantelpiece a bit. So over the last few episodes, I've been sort of trying to more proactively call it out and say, if you do have a specific book in mind, please let me know. You can, message me via socials or email me, comment on the episode if you're on YouTube or something like that. So been doing that and gotten quite a few recommendations, which is quite nice. And so this is just 4 of them, actually. The first one, George Louis Borges, The Library of Babel. Could only find it in a very nice sort of hardcover, those Penguin cloth-bound classics, the smaller versions. Could only find it in that, couldn't find it secondhand, which is a shame, but I mean, it's not that much of a shame because it's such a beautiful little edition. And I'm looking forward to that one. It sounds really interesting. It's about a library that's infinite, I think. So hopefully similar-ish to Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. I really, really love that book. These next 2 books I have never heard of. Death in Venice by Thomas Mann. Again, just another short story, I think. I think this is a collection of short stories by Thomas Mann, but the main one is Death in Venice. So looking forward to that one. And this one, Effie Briest by Fontaine. German author, apparently. Yes, Effie Briest. I thought I'd confused the name and the title of the book there, but I haven't. By Fontaine. So again, another recommendation. Managed to get this one secondhand, which is very, very nice. It says on the back that it's the most famous German novel of the 19th century, and I've never heard of it, so that's really cool. Looking forward to getting to that one as well. And then this one, Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. Time travel. So I think it's technically sci-fi because of that, but it also seems to deal with a lot of social issues. I don't think the time travel is like we're in space or anything like that. I think it's time traveling in our world. And I'm not sure if the time travel plays like a massive component of the story. I think it's more about the social issues that the main character faces as a result of the different areas they time travel to. That's sort of what I think it's going to be about. So that's 4, I think, really varied and interesting and wonderful books to eventually get into. And they've all been recommendations from you guys. So thank you so much. Please, if you've got more short stories, novellas, longer stories, poetry as well, actually, yeah. Suggest them all and I will do my best to get to them. Housekeeping, as always, if you would like to like and subscribe, I would really appreciate it. 5-star reviews are always fantastic to see. If you're on YouTube, click the duck in the corner. An amazing thing happens. So yeah, it is a free podcast though, so just sit back and enjoy the show. All right, on to the main body of the episode. 5 influential books in my life. A fellow book lover actually tagged me in this challenge. Her name is Kate, and she tagged me and she did an episode on it as well, 5 books that were incredibly influential to her. And she tried to do books that were more modern, which I thought was a really wonderful and refreshing thing to do, because I think so often, and I'm kind of guilty of this, you fall to books that have sort of stood the test of time a bit longer. So to sort of listen to her episode and see 5 books that are a bit more modern in a sense, that have been incredibly influential is a really nice thing. So I'll actually make sure that episode's linked below because I think that's definitely worth a watch. And she's a wonderful person. She's I think her Instagram bio was like redhead bookish academic or something like that. So self-confessed book lover as well. And it got me thinking about 5 books that have really been influential to me. And I was fortunate enough to I have copies of all 5 of these books, which I think always is better. I enjoy doing a podcast more when I have the physical book. So I want to stress these are in no way necessarily my favorite books of all time. These are just 5 books that are influential. Influential to me for very, very different reasons. I think at the end of the day, when you look at them, they do feel all incredibly human in their stories and what they're exploring. They're exploring humanity in a different way, so I think that's sort of important to consider. And yeah, I mean, I could have had a much longer list than this. There's books that I had to actively discount, mostly because I've spoken about them in other podcast episodes, or I've just spoken about them too much in general. So I tried to pick 5 books that I haven't spoken too much about, I don't think, except for this first book, which I did 3 episodes on. So let's kick things off. Aeschylus's The Orestian Trilogy. 3 theatre productions, 3 plays in one. Sort of cheating, I guess, because it is 3 in 1, but they're all incredibly short. I think they're about 30 pages each, so you can sort of smash them back to back to back if you want, or take a bit of time between them. And basically, it is a story about sort of death and revenge and the interplay of that. And what I really took from it was this nature of consequence, the what actually happens. You know, a murder which leads to revenge, which then leads to another murder, which then leads to more revenge. And it's kind of this cyclical nature of one, revenge, but also just consequence and what that actually means. Because I think quite often deaths in literature and we can perceive them as just kind of like this isolated incident, but it obviously has a very, very large and vast ripple effect. And it was interesting to follow this three-act tragedy, the 3 acts being 3 different plays, 3-act tragedy of what consequence actually looks like over generations. And I found it really influential for that reason. 1, because the language is just incredible. I definitely recommend reading it, but also if you're a bit self-conscious about doing this, wait till you're home alone and actually read it out aloud to yourself. I think that sort of elevates it that little bit, because it has been written to be spoken aloud and capture the beauty of language in that sort of way. But yeah, so the language is absolutely fantastic, but the story as well, I just found this story of consequence really kind of interesting, and it wasn't something that I really considered much in literature before I read this, and then after I read it, I've now been obsessed with stories about consequence and seeing consequence play out. So really, really love that. Even though it was written, does it say on the back when it was written? I probably should know. Well, the writer lived 525 to 456 BC, so quite a few thousand years ago. It's still just as fresh as ever. This is the Penguin Classics translation, very old edition, so it probably has been translated numerous times. Translated by Philip Vellacott, and I thought it just captured the beauty of language really, really nicely. So, I mean, I won't talk any more about that because I actually have done 3 episodes on it. I think it was episodes 7, 14, and 21. So go check them out if you want to see it a bit more in depth. But yeah, Aeschylus's The Orestian Trilogy, absolutely fantastic. Next on the list, where should I put this second file? Up here. Next on the list, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. I had to read this for university in my first year for a class, Literature and the Political, and I hadn't read any Maya Angelou at that stage. I'd kind of heard the name, but didn't know too much about her or her situation or what she'd been through. And I remember just reading this book and just being completely shattered, because it's a brutal, brutal story about a young black woman sort of growing up. It's also an autobiography, which I think just adds that level of intensity to it, because you know she actually suffered through this. But I think what I found really, inspiring about this and influential is she manages to speak about all these terrible things that have happened to her with such an honesty that I just don't think I'd be able to do if I'd lived through things like that. She's able to, like, there's a certain, I'll try not to spoil too much, but there's a certain scene where she's being abused, but she's able to sort of speak about it in the memory, that in the mindset she had when she was being abused. And when she was being abused, she didn't quite understand she was being abused, and she thought it was not lovely, but kind of nice in a way. And I think to have that honesty and to express yourself in that way, and to recognize that at the time I didn't think it was abusive, it was only once I sort of got past it that I realized it was incredibly hurtful and abusive, that it was a terrible, terrible thing. I think being able to recognize that, but also having the honesty to proclaimed that she didn't really think it was that bad at the start, and she thought it was this loving thing, this act of love that she was living through, and it just wasn't. I thought it was just absolutely shattering for that, just her honesty and, I guess, ability to express herself in that way was just heartbreaking in a way that has really stuck with me ever since I read it first year university, which unfortunately is over a decade ago now. So yeah, really beautiful book. It's the first in, I believe it's 7. I've never actually gone on to read the other 6, but I really should, and I probably will one day. And this one's probably due a reread as well, because it was absolutely beautiful and shattering and just inspirational. What someone can go through and still speak about it quite honestly, I think is really, really inspiring. So that was an absolutely fantastic book. Maya Angelou, I Know Where the Cage Birds Sing. I'm sure Maya Angelou would appear on so many lists of influential books and writers. So that's that one. The next one I think is a bit of a classic. I think this one would appear quite a bit on people's episodes of, 5 influential books. It's a book of 10 letters, and it's called Letters to a Young Poet by Rainer Maria Rilke. It is, if you've never read this, I don't know what you're doing. It is fantastic. Each letter is about 3 pages long, so they're incredibly brief. You can see here it's a penguin, the black classic one, so incredibly thin. There was this up-and-coming poet, and he's trying to... Was he a poet? I think he was a poet, and he's trying to... Letters to a Young Poet, he's trying to express himself through his poetry, and he's struggling a bit, so he writes these letters to Rainer Maria Rilke. And the man is called Franz Capus, and he doesn't actually include his letters in here. It's just Rilke's responses to his letters. And Rilke is just, I'd say, quite underrated as a writer. He's got this other book, the Notebooks of Multi-Lord Bridge, and that is just the most weird, wacky, wonderful collection of writing that I think I've ever read, because it is absolutely bonkers. But some of the writing and some of the ideas are just fantastic. I've thought about doing an episode on this, and I've thought about actually doing 10 episodes on it where I actually read the letters and then break the letters down. It's still in my mind, so maybe one day. But I've got so much of this is just underlined. How can we forget those ancient myths founded the beginning of all peoples? The myths about dragons who at the last moment turn into princesses. Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses, only waiting for the day when they will see us handsome and brave. Perhaps everything terrifying is deep down a helpless thing that needs our help. Imagine sending a letter to a pretty famous writer, and then he's just writing back these letters, and it's containing stuff like that. It's absolutely brutally beautiful, and I think it's so incredibly inspirational. I probably read this like once a year, because I think it can really just elevate you and lift you up and sort of set you back on the right path of what you want to achieve. I think through the daily monotony of life, you can get stuck sometimes in a bit of a rut. And then you read something like this and you're like, no, I want to pursue my passions again, because this just elevated me out. Let's go for this quote. For it is not lethargy alone which causes human relationships to repeat themselves in the same old way with such unspeakable monotony, in instance after instance. It is the fearful shying away from any kind of new, unforeseeable experience which we think we may not be equal to. Those 2 quotes are in the same letter and they're like a page apart. What the hell? So, Letters to a Young Poet is just incredibly inspirational. It's just 10 incredibly honest letters. I think they're damn near perfect. So, incredibly accessible. Like I said, 10 very short letters. Can smash it in a day, but honestly, take your time. Get a copy. You're not afraid to underline and mark and just go to war with it and have a great time. Letters to a Young Poet, Rainer Maria Rilke. The 4th book. This is a vintage mini. A lot of these books are just, 2 of them I should say, are sort of snapshots. Depression by William Styron, vintage mini. It's another brutally honest book. William Styron is a writer. It's autobiographical again, and he's doing quite well in his life. And it's all about his descent into this depressive state to the point that he wants to actually end his own life. And it's this really, I guess it's this honest portrayal of his own self, because he's doing quite well. He's in Paris at the start. He's there to receive an award. And there's this honesty of being like, I'm doing well. I'm successful, I'm a writer, I'm doing exactly what I want to be doing, but for some reason I just feel depressed. I'm in this mood all the time that is just bringing me down and bringing me down, and it doesn't seem to go away, and I don't know what to do about it. And I mean, spoilers, he sort of gets to a stage where he's ready to end his own life, and it is just through luck. You know, if you're a religious person, you'd probably say divine intervention, that he's listening to a song, and this one part, I believe it's, was it a Bach song? I think it was Bach. And this one part just catches him, and he's sort of like ready to end his own life, and he's doing it, I think it was the next day. And then he's listening to the radio, and this song comes on, and this one song just catches him. And after listening to that song, the idea of ending his own life is just suddenly repulsive to him, and he seeks help and gets better. And it's just so incredibly, I don't know, sad and depressing and wonderful and beautiful and elevating as well, and honest. I think it's the honesty that he manages to express in this particular short story. It's actually part of a larger sort of collection called Darkness Visible, but this is just one section of it, I believe. That's what I've been told anyway. I've never actually gone to seek out the rest of it, because this is just, I think, so complete and so all I need to read from him in regards to this particular topic. He has read other stuff he's written. He's got a collection of letters that I've read. He wrote Sophie's Choice, I believe, as well, now that I'm thinking about that. But it's just this incredibly honest portrayal of a man who has it all and still isn't satisfied, not in a way that he wants to accumulate more in like a capitalist sense. He wants to like just accumulate wealth and wealth and wealth, but he's kind of confused as to why this depression is touching him when he's got it all. And it's kind of like this very scary, honest portrayal of a man who is just confused because he doesn't understand that mental health can and probably will touch everyone at some point in their lives. So incredibly inspirational for that, because it's just, you know, I think it's nice to see someone who is quite honest, being like, yeah, I was living a good life and I still couldn't escape the throngs of mental health and mental health issues. So Depression by William Styron, absolutely loved it, absolutely recommend it. Honestly, reading Depression by William Styron to sort of capture that man at his lowest, and then to read something like Letters to a Young Poet to like elevate you completely out of that darkness, is probably like a really nice combination. I'd probably read them like that, because yeah, they're fantastic. I'm going to start building a second pile there. This last book is absolutely beautiful. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry's Wind, Sand and Stars. I'm going to assume that a lot of you have heard of Antoine de Saint-Exupéry because of The Little Prince, which is a book that also could have been on this list. And you've probably read The Little Prince and then never read anything else from him. And let me tell you, he absolutely deserves more attention. I think The Little Prince is absolutely fantastic. Again, that's a book I probably read routinely once a year because it's so short and brief and beautiful. But this is actually the story, again, it's autobiographical, of Saint-Exupéry's life. He's a pilot for the Post, and it's a collection of stories. So he meets various people along his journeys, but the main body of this work is he crashes in the Libyan desert, I believe it is. I'm hoping the blurb is going to tell me it is the Libyan desert, so that's good to know. He crashes in the Libyan desert, and he's completely isolated from everything. You know, it's in a time when there's no mobile phones, and he's there with his fellow co-pilot, and they are just stuck there. And the main body of this work is, I think it's like 50 pages, and you try read it if you can in one go. And it's him surviving, him and his co-pilot surviving for this period of time in the desert with pretty much no supplies, expecting to die. If you've read The Little Prince and love that, you definitely want to read at least that section of the story, because you can see the antecedents of The Little Prince in there. I mean, The Little Prince it starts off with a pilot crashing in the desert, and then the Little Prince comes. So you can sort of already see how the narratives are starting to blend, and how this was incredibly influential into creating that absolute masterpiece of a novella. But I think his language is just, his writing style, his language is just so unmatched, because it's so incredibly stark and beautiful, and at times it's just stripped, and at other times it's just elevated completely up into this really dense exploration of, you know, the human endeavor, the human struggle, the sheer will and determination to live and to survive and to battle through something so austere like being stuck in the middle of the desert with no supplies. And just yeah, that sheer humanistic determination to continue on is absolutely beautifully inspirational. I know there's so many other books that do that as well. I mean, any kind of war story is going to do that as well. But I don't know, there was just, it's something about, in a war story, I guess you're battling generally the enemy, whereas this, he's just battling the elements. It's him against his own kind of mental state. At any point, he's in the middle of the desert, he can just give up, lie down and die. But it's just kind of like that. You're battling no one other than yourself, and you've just got to succeed because that is the only option. So Wind, Sand and Stars by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry is just brutally beautiful, and I would absolutely recommend. So that's my 5 influential books. Like I said, in no way are they necessarily my favorite books, but they're just genuinely beautiful books. And they're all incredibly humanistic stories. So I think that's something to take away from this list. I hope this list was comprehensive and varied and maybe brought your attention to a book you hadn't heard of, or perhaps something of a writer you didn't quite know. So I hope you enjoyed. And yeah, let's get to the next part of the episode. Okay, what was I reading this week? This week I was reading this book, Papyrus by Irene Vallejo. It is absolutely incredible, actually. It was a gift from my mother, and she'll be very glad to know that I'm reading it. It's pretty dense, but because it's a non-fiction book, you can actually just sort of dip in and out chapters at a time. It's a history of books, history of papyrus, panoramic survey of how books shaped not just the ancient world, but ours too, an enthralling 2,000-year journey through the history of books and reading. And I thought it was going to be not dry, but I thought it wasn't, I didn't realize it was going to be as enjoyable and colorful as it is, because I mean, I'm not even that far into it. I'm only 33 pages in, but I don't think we've really even discussed books so far. We've just been following the life of Alexander the Great on his campaigns through the Middle East into Persia and heading towards sort of Asia. It's just incredibly enjoyable for that. I mean, the hallmark of a good nonfiction book is always the bibliography, and it's incredibly dense. So she's done her research, and it just shows, and it reads as incredibly readable. I know it's nonfiction, but it definitely just is this non-fictive. It's almost like someone wise is just telling you this really enthralling large tale of life, and you know you're going to get the information you want. You know you're going to eventually get to the important stuff, but at the moment it's just this really colorful exploration of the world, and it's very scene setting. And we're getting to the point that we're now getting to books, and we're talking about the Library of Alexandria. We're sort of building to it nicely, but we had to set the scene first, which was incredibly important, because you want people to sort of read this book to learn, but you also want them to be entertained as well. So, you know, I'm absolutely loving it. I'm not reading it too quickly. Like I said, just a couple chapters a day. That's enough, but absolutely fun, absolutely outrageous. I think it only really touches upon the Greek world and the Roman world. So, you know, because it's a, 450-page book, that it is going to be quite dense and not explore everything too quickly, which I think is really important. So Papyrus by Irene Vallejo. Absolutely loving it so far. Thank you, Mother, for that gift. If you have listened this far, please consider hitting those 5 stars. I would really appreciate it. Also, feel free to subscribe, hit the duck in the corner if you're on YouTube. Head to the website and support the pod in other ways if you can. But otherwise, just as always, thank you for listening. So I think today we've got to finish with another quote from Rainer Maria Rilke, Letters to a Young Poet, because, I mean, this entire collection of letters is just so incredibly quotable. So here we go. Progress must come from deep within and cannot be forced or accelerated. Everything must be carried to term before it is born.